Cool.
So they will get a little bit of me talking with and then they will get me. Hold on. Oh, okay. I bet you guys all loved hearing about the 20-second lag, didn't you? Good evening, everyone. I'm so excited to be here this evening, and I'm very excited you are all as well. I am Jenny. I'm the Community and Events Manager at Music Hackspace. Lots of you will know me. So I am just going to crack on with introductions for this session. So today I think we have our first doctor.
Oh,
I know. Our first doctor cool. Leading a session. So welcome, Dr. Isobel Anderson.
Thank you.
We're very pleased to have you today. And the best bit is that you're a doctor in the thing you're going to be talking about.
Yes.
Is even better.
Yeah, I mean, nothing hugely useful, like not saving lives, doctor, but
hey now, I reckon we'll find this session very useful indeed.
Yes.
So if you don't know who Dr. Isobel Anderson is, you're a UK-based musician, sound artist, and academic, and you have a PhD in sonic arts from Queen's University Belfast, and you specialised in this PhD in field recording with studio composition and experimental performance. It's like the hat trick of dreams right there. So that's so exciting. Alongside this, your self-produced and self-released albums have amassed over 25 million Spotify streams, which is why that's a wild number. Yeah, that's very well done. I've started applauding then, I'm sorry, but you get the point. And you've been broadcast on BBC Radio 2 and 3 and 4 and BBC Radio 6. You're also the founder of the Female DIY Musician, which is an online resource supporting female identifying musicians to record and release their music from home. And it includes the podcast Girls Twiddling Knobs, on which I have been a guest.
Yes, you have been a guest. So
I've been a guest.
Can't remember the exact episode number for people, but go to femalediymusician.com / I think it's 60. I think it's 60 something, 62, 63, 64, something like that.
I should know, but I don't. I'm sorry.
I could have prepared that. But anyway, yeah, Jenny is on it, and it's an episode.
I am, which has been critically acclaimed, and it's been shortlisted for awards, and it's now got an online community of over 1.3 thousand members, which is fabulous. And you have an online course designed specifically for female musicians called the Home Recording Academy, which I'm sure you're welcome to talk about at any point. But also you're a member of 2% Rising, my audio network as well, which is lovely.
Yeah.
So a whole lot of good stuff there. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so. I've actually got some slides that are basically exactly this.
Oh no!
But at least it'll give people like a visual. It's totally it means I can whiz through them, and I'll just give people a visual so people can know what the logo is of the podcast, for example. So yeah, anything that was missed, I'm sure I'll fill in. But yeah, okay. that sounds about it.
All right, terrific. Well, we've had a lot of people who've said that they're excited to hear you talk today. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to you to present. So thank you very much, and on with the show.
Great. Okay, thanks so much, Jenny. So I'm really glad to be here today, and I can already see in the chat some people that I recognise, but if you are new to me, if I don't know you yet, then it's lovely to meet you on this live masterclass on Zoom or workshop. So I'm going to share my screen. So most of the time I'm going to be presenting some slides. I've made some hopefully quite accessible, engaging slides for you today, and I'm going to be sharing video and audio to sort of look at what some of the topics that we're looking at to do a field recording. I'm also going to be asking you questions throughout, so I've got my eye on the chat to just see what you're answering. So without further ado, I will share my screen. But I will have to, before I do that, I'm just going to make sure I'm getting myself all set up. Right, so I will now share my screen. 1 minute. Zoom, share. Okay. And you should now be seeing my full slides. And I have started at the wrong slide. Hang on a minute. Get it together, Isobel. Right. Okay. Now we should be starting. So welcome to Using Field Recordings in Music Production with me, Isobel Anderson for Music Hackspace. So it's my first Music Hackspace workshop, so that's very exciting to be doing this with them, and with such a fantastic series as well, championing women who are sharing their skills in this area. So this is what we're going to cover today. So we're going to cover what field recording is and why you might use it. I'm going to be asking you some questions about this to kind of help us fill in those blanks. We're going to look at how you might go out and make some recordings. We're also then going to be looking at manipulation, and that's going to be the kind of the real meat of this, is the manipulation part and the exploration part. So what do you do with those field recordings, and how do you turn them into musical textures in production? And then there'll be time for Q&A as well at the end. A tiny bit about me. So like I said, we've kind of blitzed through this, but just there's pictures. So if that makes this come to life a bit more. So as Jenny said, I have an MA and PhD from the Sonic Arts Research Centre at Queen's University, Belfast. This is a picture of the Sonic Lab at the Sonic Arts Research Centre, it was a fantastic place to study sound and experiment with all things sonic. And the Sonic Lab has this amazing configuration of 48 speakers with a grate for a floor. So it's actually traditionally used as a butcher's floor, but it means that the speakers that are underneath, that you can get the sound coming up from underneath you. So you can do some fantastic sound design, composition stuff and experiments. And like Jenny said, my research was very much in field recording amongst other things, but my thesis title was My Words Trace a Path, Encounters with Place Through Voice, Performance and Field Recording. So field recordings was a really integral part of how I gathered the sounds and the recordings that I then used in my composition practice. As well as that, I have self-produced and self-released 4 albums, which, as Jenny said, have over 25 million Spotify streams. So if you go and search for me on Spotify, you'll find these, and just so you've got a visual representation. And then also I founded the Female DIY Musician in 2018. If you want to find out more, go to femalediymusician.com. And this is to help, and it offers women training and support in recording and producing their music from home. And it includes the critically acclaimed podcast Girls Twiddling Knobs, which you can find on all of your podcast streaming apps and websites there, and an online community of now actually over 1.6 thousand members. So if you go to Facebook and type in Girls Twiddling Knobs, you can find that. And then also Home Recording Academy, which is an online course with currently over 400 students enrolled to date. So I feel like I'm really growing an amazing community and even a movement in women being able to learn these skills of recording and production in communities that feel safe and supportive, and crucially really, really useful, practical, creative as well. So first, what is field recording? So I would love to know in the chat, what is field recording? Can anyone give me any definitions that they can think of? What to you is field recording? And actually, while you're answering that, I'm going to quickly load this up on my phone because I've shared my screen and I've maximized it. I can't see this now. So, and Jenny, feel free while I'm looking to tell me any comments that are coming in. But has anyone got any definitions of what is field recording? Let me see if I can load this up.
I certainly shall, the omnipresent voice for a moment. I'll just share a couple of things that are coming in while people have a think about that question in the chat.
Fantastic.
We have some alumni members of your academy here, which is great.
Oh, fantastic. Great.
Yeah. We have people from all over, from Belfast, Glastonbury, Bosnia, Oxfordshire, Denmark, USA, lots and lots of cool places. Someone said the lab looks very cool. It does. Okay, so we've got some questions coming in now. So we've got, some answers to your question.
Okay.
So Isobel said recording not in home or in studio, maybe outdoors.
Mm-hmm.
Abigail said recording anything outside of a dedicated recording space.
Mm-hmm.
Marion said recording not in your studio.
Mm-hmm.
Kinsleep said recordings of all sounds not directly considered musical from everyday life through nature.
Uh-huh.
Marion suggested another one, which was natural sounds. We've got capturing the unique sounds of an environment, recording outside with the portable device, recording found sounds in the environment, and also including man-made sounds like cars, machines, anything really. Catherine suggested field recording to me is any sound from an environment which isn't music yet.
Okay.
I think we've covered it there.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, really good responses. And I think it's and it's great to hear like so many different people's interpretations, although there's real overlaps there and a lot of agreement from the sounds of it. So it's, there's a lot of questions really that there isn't really much of a definitive definition of what field recording is. Definitely a lot of people will think of it because of its name as something that's attached to nature. It's about going out into, a field or recording a stream or recording a forest or something. But in reality, really, and especially in, 2022, it's much more about recording just outside of the studio. And so there's questions about what is the field then? Because is it even out? What's a studio nowadays? You can be recording from your living room, and that can be your studio. So the boundary between what the field is and the studio has really started to kind of break down a lot, I think. But maybe it's about the intention, and maybe it's about trying to. There were some good responses about capturing something in the moment. It could also be about trying to capture more unusual sounds, trying to capture sounds that we don't normally associate with music. But really, it's about recording outside of a traditional studio context. And that can be indoors, that can be in an urban environment, and that can be outside in nature as well. And then there's this question of who is a field recordist. And I think that's really important, especially now, because technology is evolving so fast that people are starting to record on their phones and get good recordings on their phones, which was not possible before. And yes, there's lots of expensive equipment that you can buy, and there's no getting away from the fact that that is all very good. But what you can do now with your smartphone is better than ever before. And I was just listening actually on BBC Six Music recently to the producer Flume, and he was saying how his new record that he's brought out has lots of field recordings that he made on his phone. And so it just goes to show that it's becoming more and more accessible, which I think is really exciting. But therefore, the idea of who this field recordist is opening up as well, like the field opens up too. It's not necessarily somebody standing in a field with an expensive, pair of headphones and a massive recording device and a big boom mic. It could be someone just walking in the park or walking around their neighborhood with a smartphone. So these are, I think, quite exciting questions, and heralds a bit of a change in the recent years. So why do it? Why do field recording? Well, these are the things that I think are really exciting about field recording. So it engages your creativity in new ways, because you step outside of the box of your DAW, especially if you're doing it in more of a kind of, slightly purist way of you're actually going out and making field recordings and bringing them in, as opposed to just going on a website and downloading them. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you do engage with it in that kind of slightly more purist way where you're sourcing the recordings, it really engages you in things beyond your DAW, and starts you and kind of making connections with the world around you and your production practice. So I think it's really exciting from that point of view. It adds totally unique textures to your music and your art. So I'm not directing this solely at musicians here. It could be that you're an artist that wants to work with sound installation. So it's really exciting in terms of what you can add as textures that ground your work in a particular place, in a particular time, or don't in interesting ways. And we'll look at that a little bit later. It also encapsulates ideas, concepts, and atmospheres that are otherwise difficult to achieve using traditional methods of composition, precisely because we can take a kind of essence of a time and a place, or even just the essence of a texture, like the kettle boiling or newspaper ripping. We can take those textures and then use them to explore different concepts that may be hard to do through lyrics and also through traditional instrumentation, and even through the production capabilities traditionally found in your DAW as well. And for anyone who's watching, who's wondering what is a DAW, that's a digital audio workstation, which could mean, which is basically your recording software. So you could be using GarageBand, Ableton, Logic, Pro Tools, etc., etc. It can also ground a track in a particular place. So it can really mean that, you know, you're hearing a track and you're like, I know that that is a train station, for example, or you're listening to the track and you know that you're in a forest or somewhere like that. But it can also totally abstract a track from place and time. It can subvert the track in terms of having a juxtaposition or blurring the lines about where that field recording is, or maybe bringing in different field recordings from different places that you'd never normally hear, and therefore really subverting what's going on in place and time. And that's really exciting as well. So I want to just share a couple of audio examples. So I'm just going to load these up. And these are examples from my own discography. And the first one I'm going to share is called Through the Arcade. Or actually, the first one I'm going to share is called 4284/I'm Alive. And this is an example of an audio, a field recording that's been used in a very, very sort of realistic sense. And it very much ties in with the message of the song. The song was written about the abortion rights movement in Northern Ireland before abortion was made legal. Although there's still issues there, but we won't go into that. And it was made about that issue. And it was actually using someone's real account of having to travel from Ireland to England to access an abortion. So the lyrics are very clearly about that topic. I use a field recording, which is a binaural recording of the march that took place to protest against these laws. And it was called Rally for Choice. So I use that at the end to just ground that track in that particular movement, in that place, in that time. So I'm just going to show you this track, and I'm going to just quickly load it up so that when I share it, it's just there. Okay. Okay, so share my screen. Here we go. So I'm going to just show the last section of it, just to give you an idea of the music and then how it transitions into this binaural recording of the march. It's a small section at the end, and like I say, it just kind of gives a sonic grounding that I wouldn't be able to get across, the passion, the multitude of voices, the feeling out there on the street. There's no way I could have got that across musically in the same way as using this field recording. So I'm just going to play from the end of the last chorus.
This is my body. This is by no means a commandment, but an end to silence and shame.
Our bodies, our lives, our right to decide. Our bodies, our lives, our right to decide. Our bodies, our lives, our right to decide. Woo!
Okay, so I'm going to come back to my slides there. So, oh, actually, I'm going to show you another example. So that's the first example, is the I'm Alive song. And another thing that I didn't mention, I like about using that field recording, is that you can hear the voices of people who are not just women. So it shows that this movement is not just exclusively important to women, but that people from, you know, all parts of the community in Ireland got behind this movement, and Northern Ireland in particular. So the next track that I'm going to show, I'm just going to show the end section of this, or I'm actually going to show the beginning section of this track, which is called Through the Arcade. It was an instrumental track in my most recent album, which is a long time ago now, Chalk Flint. And this is, it's called Through the Arcade. And so it's taking recordings from an arcade, which is here in Hastings where I live. But I've used them in ways that create this kind of subverted, more surreal sonic soundscape. And so it's much less about being anchored in a particular place. It's more about drifting through quite a surreal place that you can't maybe quite ground yourself in, or even though you can maybe, you know, get an impression of the kinds of places the recordings were originally taken. So I'm going to play this now. So that's an example of where you're using field recordings, but you're abstracting them and subverting them, and then keeping some of it quite, you know, true to the original as well. So let's think a little bit about being a purist somewhat with field recording. I like to go out and make my own recordings. I do occasionally rip something off the internet if I just need something that I'd never be able to go out and record, but I love recording myself. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time just talking about how to go out and do this yourself, if this is something that you're interested in. So we're going to look at preparing to record. Just out of interest, who here, and Jenny, you'll have to help me by feeding back some answers here, who here has been out field recording before? Let me know.
Sure thing. I'm just going to let that feed over.
Sure.
And yeah, a bunch more people have been saying hello.
Amazing.
Actually, someone, Hi Harmonics, made a really interesting comment, which is field recording practice helps you listen differently, even when not recording, which I thought was quite lovely.
It absolutely does. It's one of the best ways to train your ears, your listening skills. And it can be very meditative, you know.
Yeah, we're getting some feedback coming now. Oh, lots of yeses. Yeah,
great.
Yes, okay, awesome. I feel like this is a group that like to experiment with their sounds, which is awesome.
That's very cool. Okay,
they're in the right place.
They certainly are. Yeah, they certainly are. Okay, great. So that's really good to know. So you've all been out field recording. So hopefully some of these ideas will, I mean, they'll probably complement what you're doing already, and maybe there'll be one or two that will enhance what you're doing. So equipment. So often people will ask me, what equipment do I need? So I would say these are like the real essentials here. So you need some kind of recorder. Hear me when I say this. Hear me when I say this. That can be your smartphone. It does not have to be a fancy recorder. It does not have to be like in this picture, a Zoom H6. It does not have to be, you know, something that is going to set you back hundreds of pounds. It can be your smartphone, and you can get some great add-ons to a smartphone. Particularly Rode do some microphones that you can insert onto your smartphone that you can use. So when I say recorder, just remember you can use a smartphone, and it's better to get started with a smartphone than not do it at all. But if you want to invest, I do recommend the Zoom series of recorders. They're very good. Microphones. Now, if you've got your Zoom, if you've got your smartphone, a lot of the time they will have inbuilt microphones. You can see on this Zoom, it's got a stereo pair of condenser mics. And depending on the type of Zoom you have, you can also change the positioning of them. That's an XY configuration there, but you can, on some of the Zoom recorders, you can move them. If you're going to be out recording outside and you're going to be, and if you're going to be in nature, as it were, without getting into a philosophical debate about what is nature, but if you're going to be outside where the wind could hit you, a windshield will be very useful. I would also say that if you're going to be out recording, especially for a while, footwear, think about footwear, make sure that it's practical. I've done a lot of recording in quite remote places, so I've always had very sturdy footwear to make sure that I can scramble through a bog, or like get up a slippery hill or something. So footwear is important. Clothing as well, so make sure that you are actually weather ready, and food and drink. And I know those things might kind of seem a bit obvious, but it's really important that you make sure that when you're going out, you're going to be able to enjoy that and get the most from it, and not be getting 2 hours in and thinking, oh my God, I'm really hungry and I've walked a long way and I'm really far from the train station, or whatever it is you're doing. I would also add, if you are using a Zoom recorder or something equivalent, then batteries as well. Bring a spare pack of batteries. That's really, really handy to have. So the next thing to think about is doing a bit of research, because it's all very well going out and recording, and I would always advocate just stepping out and seeing what you find, but having a think about some of this stuff can be really helpful. So where are you going to go? And sometimes it's just there's a particular place that you're already curious about. Sometimes it's that there's a particular route that you take, every day. Maybe it's that you want to go somewhere totally different that you've never been before, but actually intentionally thinking, where do you want to go? Then also thinking about when, because a lot of the time you might find that it's quite frustrating because you've gone somewhere only to realize that at a certain time of day, that's when all the kids come out of school and it, changes the soundscape, or that's the time of day when no one's around and you actually wanted it to be busy and you wanted to hear cars and, voices and everything. So thinking about when you record is really key. Also think about who you go with. Now, because this is a We Move workshop, I do feel like I want to acknowledge that a lot of women in particular can find the idea of going off somewhere quite remote or on their own not necessarily very safe. So maybe it's not to say it isn't safe, but if you feel like it might not be safe, maybe you go with somebody, but maybe you choose who you go with so that it's someone you're going to be able to actually do some field recording with, or maybe you go on your own. I've done most of my field recording on my own, and I've found it a really, like I was saying before, quite meditative, sometimes even quite healing, a wonderful way to spend time with myself. So that question of with whom is quite important as well. And then why are you recording? It's okay if it's just because you're interested, but as you can see from the examples that I gave just a minute ago, especially the first one, there was a really clear intention for me to get that recording of that Rally for Choice march. I really wanted to get a document of, I originally made the recording with no song in mind. I just wanted to document that time because I felt like it was a really important time in Irish history and Northern Irish history in particular as well. And it is. But it could be that you want to, your why for why you're going out and field recording is just to expand your skills in recording. Maybe it's that you want to be exploring textures of water. Maybe it's that you want to be exploring urban environments. It could be something a bit broader like that, but maybe there is a specific event or a specific sound or a specific concept that you're working towards that ties in with your production and your composition. So these are really good questions to help you formulate, right, where am I going to go? When am I going to do it? Who am I going to do it with? And why am I doing this in the first place? What are my aims here? And then, so it could be that you decide you're going out and doing free recording. And so this decision and then thinking about whether you're free recording or actually intentionally grabbing specific sounds will inform how and what you record. So free recording will likely mean that you have lots of longer recordings to listen through. which is fine, but it just means that you'll collect a lot more audio. Whereas with an intentional approach, this may mean that you have less sifting to do later. But this should always be informed by your why. Why are you using field recordings? And if it's just to experiment, if it's just to collect the sounds of where you live every day and then bring that together into a bigger piece, free recording might be the right thing. Whereas if it's that you want to, like in the example I gave of 4284 I'm Alive, the Rally for Choice March, it could be you're like, no, I specifically am just going to intentionally record this experience. But we always want to be thinking about, it's particularly if you're doing this intentional approach, what atmospheres, concepts, emotions are you trying to evoke with the use of these recordings? And even if you've done some free recording and you're listening back to what you've recorded, then you want to ask yourself the question, okay, when I listen to these recordings, what atmospheres, concepts, and emotions am I hearing? Am I feeling? Am I experiencing when I listen to these recordings? So, we can reverse engineer that intentionality to listening to free recordings as well. So here's an audio example of where another audio example of using a field recording, and it's using a field recording to really subvert the message of the song, which is Know Your Heart. And so I'm just going to quickly get that up for you. So with Know Your Heart, with this song, the message behind it is very much about being in your 20s. I wrote this when I was 27, not being in a good place and feeling really disappointed in myself and ashamed for not being in a good place, and kind of feeling like that I was in this funny in-between zone of not really quite feeling like I'd adulted in the right way, but also feeling like childhood was quite far away. And so I used a field recording in the second verse to really bring this message home, but in a way that I could never have done without it sounding really, really laborious in the lyrics of the song. So I'm going to play from going from the first chorus into the second verse, and you'll hear the recording that I'm talking about. And I need to refresh this. Hang on. So it should be around here.
I need someone. So much distress, well, go out tonight.
So I'm just showing you a little clip there. But that field recording of a children's play park, that was the children's play park outside of my house. And so I'd listen to it every single day. And it was almost like, it was like my childhood taunting me of, being an adult and not being in the place that I'd hoped I'd be at that time. So I put it in that second verse with that very low note on a Hammond organ to give it that sinister feeling. But it just shows how field recordings can add something really conceptual to your music that would be really laborious and ineffective to try and explain and articulate through the lyrics, or even sometimes with instrumentation or production, traditional production. So just adding in that setting of that playground, and along with the other musical elements, helped to paint this picture of what I was trying to describe in this song. So I wanted to show that example as well. So moving on, let's think about when you're out in the field then. We talked about preparation. What about when you're out in the field? Well, I think it's important to think about some process methodology stuff. So it's good to just have some I would always have a methodology attached to my recording, because a lot of the time when I was doing my my sonic arts like PhD compositions, I would be making a lot of recordings, and then so therefore having a methodology before I went out of how I was going to make those recordings really helped to have a bit more of a system, so I could free record but just have a few constraints so that it's had some kind of system or order, so that when I went back through it, and I wasn't also desperately trying to record everything, I just had made some of these decisions. So length of recordings, I had a rule that I would record for 5 minutes in some of the projects. For example, I would only make 5-minute recordings. Otherwise, I could be there for 2 hours just listening in case something happened the next minute, you know? So I'd make 5-minute recordings only. And it meant that then I only ever had to listen back to recordings that were 5 minutes. And maybe I'd have 40 of these, but at least they're all kind of in little chunks that I can listen to. But you might decide, well, actually, I just want to make a half-hour recording every day. And that's going to be my project, that I make a half-hour recording every day in the same place at the same time. Great. You know, that's great. But just having some kind of methodology there really helps. The duration of your trip. So maybe it's that you go somewhere for a whole week. I've done some projects where I've done that. One of my pieces that I made for my PhD was a document of a week spent on the Isle of Harris in the Outer Hebrides. Another project was documenting time spent in a forest in Northern Ireland, and I spent 4 months going there every day. So duration of trip can be important, but it could just be that you go somewhere for half an hour every day, or it could be that you do one trip that's an hour long. You know, it's up to you, but having some again, making some of these decisions can really help. Number of trips, so what I've just talked about hopefully illustrates that. And then like really practical things like, are you going to use multiple mics at a time? I've done recordings where I've been using my binaural in-ear microphones and also recording through my Zoom stereo microphones at the same time, so that I have a mix and I can choose whether I use the binaural recording or the stereo recording. But it could be that you're also plugging mics into the recorder that you've got, like for example, a boom mic, like a shotgun mic, or it could be another type of mic. I've done recordings with contact mics, with hydrophones for underwater. Then also mic positioning. So how are you going to position the mic? And obviously there's lots of things you may want to take into account, but particularly things like distance, because obviously the further away, especially if you're making a stereo recording, the more of that soundscape you're potentially going to be able to capture. Whereas if you're very close to something, then it may be something that's much more central in the stereo field. So there's all those kinds of considerations. But also, it's really important to think about, well, what other ways might you need to document your time so that at the very least you can make sense of your recordings later, but at the most also it becomes part of the art, you know, whatever you're making. So it could be that you're making notes as you record, even if it's that when you press stop on your recording, you're making some notes afterwards so you don't pick up any sound of pens or papers, or you're not, you know, trying to use your phone or whatever. It could also be that you do drawings when you're out, or you collect objects, or you take images, photographs. And that can be really helpful in not only remembering what was going on at the time, but then also feeding into, who knows, maybe one of those images becomes the front cover of your new album. Maybe those objects become an installation. So it can be a great way of just making it multidimensional, not just about the audio. And then also, I would just keep in mind all the time that a lot of the time, field recording traditionally was seen as something that's an objective document. We're objectively documenting how a place sounds in the moment. But in reality, it's actually an imperfect moment. There's multiple decisions that go into how a field recording is made, which we've just covered a lot of them already. Every single field recording is made by a human. So the idea that they are just these kind of totally objective documents of a place is not really very realistic or what's the word, like truthful really. And really in reality, they are an imperfect moment. So this can be quite helpful as well to kind of try and lose that perfectionism of trying to make it sound absolutely perfect, and instead having it document a moment and imperfectly. So making your selections, and this is the kind of final part of this, actually going out, making recordings, and then you bring them back, and then you've got potentially a whole, you know, memory card's worth of loads and loads of recordings. So how do you, when you get them off your recording device and you've got them on your, I would preferably bring them into your DAW so you can see them and navigate through them. How do you make those selections of what you're going to use and what you can work with? So if you've got lots of recordings, which many people often do, decide how much time you have to listen back. Just be really practical about this. Decide how much time do I have to listen back? Maybe you've got an hour, maybe you've got 3 hours, maybe you've got 20 minutes. Well, therefore, prioritize the audio that you have a hunch will be the most promising. Don't try necessarily, especially if you're short on time, and just listen through to everything. This is where taking notes when you're out, taking images, all that stuff can really help later on. And you'd be like, okay, I'm just reading through my log. Yeah, that one was a really good recording. It had some really interesting stuff in it. I'm going to listen to that first. So be really practical with how you listen back. And like I say, use your notes, images, objects to help you with this. If you have fewer recordings, then you may be able to listen to all of them all the way through. Great. And you can make, more detailed notes, or if you didn't make notes in the field, make new notes as you listen back. So this is my kind of process of filtering through the recordings I've made. I do 2 rounds of listening. The first one is I just listen. I don't do anything. I just listen. The second round, I listen and I make notes as I listen to the audio, and I note which parts of the audio I think that I'll most likely use. I also note if I like a particular whole section, or if there's just one sound that I'd like to isolate and work with later. And I'll use the time markers. So it'll be like 01 minutes, 23 seconds. I will be writing that in so that I can go back in and edit out those sections. And then we get on to editing your field recording. So when you've selected the bits you want to work with, then we can start editing. So obviously you can do some of the more kind of conventional things like you would with any audio file. So cutting it, fading it, splicing it together. So sticking it together with another one or looping it. And I'm going to show some video examples I've pre-recorded so that there's no sound issues. And I'm going to show you an example of selecting out some parts of a field recording now. So just bear with me. I'm going to load it up for you. Okay, so I'm now going to share this demo of what I'm talking about. Okay, so I have loaded up a field recording that I made in Glasgow of an escalator, and I can see there's some sections that I like already. I've listened to some of it, and I like the fact that in this bit there's a kind of repeating rhythm because of the way that the escalator is moving. But I also want to sample some of this bit to try and do some stuff with later on as well. So I'm just gonna listen to that. I think I'm going to take it from around here. I'm going to just copy that much and I'm going to plonk it down here. And I'm going to call this my escalator edits. I know these are just my edited bits. And I'm going to mute that as well. And then I'm just going to come to this bit where it's got this rhythm and there's a bit where a woman's speaking. Okay. So I think it's around there that I want to start it. So I just did an edit there, I'm on a Mac, so Apple E, and then I'm gonna then make an edit there as well. And that is gonna be my little loop that I'm gonna use. So then I'm gonna mute this and have that on instead. And that's an example of me choosing some bits in a field recording and then cutting them out. But I'm not getting rid of them from the original one, just in case I want to come back to that. But I've got 2 little cuts there, and I can start working with them in lots of exciting ways. Okay, so that's my little example of cutting, like editing and choosing some parts of a field recording. Now, I'm also going to show you equalization. So I've got 2 examples of equalization that I'm going to show now, and I'm just going to get them loaded up for you. Okay, so I'll share my screen again. Okay, so now we're going to get into some EQ briefly. So here's my original escalator edit, the first cut that I did. And this is what it sounds like just normally, obviously. So what I've done is I've used EQ to bring out some of the different elements of the sounds. Obviously with EQ, you're increasing and decreasing different frequencies. So it acts like a filter for the frequencies. And so I've given sometimes with EQ, people use it in very subtle ways, but with field recordings, we can use it in really quite drastic and, very obvious ways to bring out different parts of the soundscape. So let me show you, I'm going to switch between some different EQs that I put on. I've got an EQ where I've really raised the top end, the high end frequencies, but I've also then boosted the gain because obviously these are much quieter in this recording, these high end frequencies. The next EQ I'll show in this walkthrough is me boosting the low end, so the bass frequencies just, and then taking out everything from the mid to the high end. And then I'll also show you after that how you can then create a kind of filter of gradually bringing in more of the frequencies and then bring them out again. So let's listen to that. And I'm actually going to loop that so that, and do a little crossfade so that we can do that. There. So. And you can see that there's so many possibilities with the type of sounds you're getting, you're kind of extracting out these field recordings. So it then becomes really, what's the point of what you're doing? What are you aiming towards? What are your intentions with your composing with field recordings? And what do you like as well? Okay, and I will show you the next example of using EQ. Okay, so this is what the EQ sounds like with this other cut that I did. So hopefully that just gives you a little taste of just how much EQ can start transforming your field recordings. And sometimes people will say to me, oh, I get really frustrated when I record because it doesn't sound how I want it to, or how I remember hearing it in my ears. And I hope that that just shows that actually you can do so much by manipulating the recordings with EQ. Now, what I did was quite extreme. So just remember that you don't have to always be so extreme with it. But what you can absolutely do is do quite, subtle things as well. And that can really lift your field recordings without it, sounding kind of overly weird or overly manipulated. So just getting my panel up. So now let's move on to manipulating. So let's think about how you start to kind of really, on the one hand, build from those quite simple ideas of EQ and just cutting, and then move into actually building out things that are more conceptual. So I've got an example of layering different textures, and let's have a look at that. Which one is that? It's this one. So now we've cut out some sections of our audio. I've just zoomed into the first one that I did, and I've duplicated it, and then I've changed it a little bit too. So you can see that I've actually transposed it. So I've raised the pitch, which has also speeded it up slightly. So it now sounds different. But I also wanted to show you that I faded it. So we're going to look at how to do a transition and how you can use, the same recording, same section to start adding in different layers. So this is some fades that I've done, and this is really easy in Ableton. You just pull it along. You can then change the shape of the fade like this. But I wanted something that gradually faded in, and then you can see that I start the fade just as this one is even coming in. But what I'm going to do is, I didn't want to shorten it. I wanted to bring the fade away. Hang on. It means that I can actually get this fade up. I can have this fade coming in before this one has left. And it means that I'm not going to have a weird kind of transition where one dies out and the other comes in. It's going to hopefully feel seamless. And then just as that one's dropping out, I'm dropping the other one out. So let's have a listen and see how that sounds. So not particularly, interesting necessarily, but it's just a way of building up some layers of texture, just to give you a demonstration of that. Okay, and then I'm also going to show you looping a field recording as well. So now we're going to look at looping. So I showed you that there was a bit in this field recording where it gets quite rhythmical with the escalator. So this is the section that I cut out, and then you can see I've duplicated it here because I want to loop it. And the way that I'm going to try and get it to line up is if I zoom in relatively close to where I've cut it, I can see that that kind of beat, as it were, is starting around here. So I'm just going to keep it like this. And then if I pull this over, I can get it to kind of line up. And that should sound like it's looped quite seamlessly. Although obviously, because it's a field recording, it's not totally bang on time. And you could make that even more in time if you wanted to manipulate that and quantize that. But we're just going to loop it here, and let's see what that sounds like. So that's sounding, you know, pretty good. You could obviously go right in, and if you're not happy with it, move it around a bit and see how that sounds. But then obviously you can then, if we're happy with that, what I would do is I'd then copy this, and I would be then putting it there, just so I know that both of those files are exactly the same length. And then I would highlight both of them and duplicate, and then you can highlight all of them and duplicate that. And then you've got this long line of looped escalator beat, basically, if that's what you're into. So that is a really quick look at looping a section of a field recording. Okay, and then next we're going to look at sampling elements. I know that a lot of people are really interested in how, you know, you might use particular sounds from a field recording and then make that into a beat or make that into a melody line or something like that. So we're going to look at that. And then after that, I'll show you how to further extrapolate just on a more granular level the field recording. I'm going to use Ableton's grain delay to do that. So I'm going to show you both of those things. Okay, so now let's look at some stuff that's even cooler that you can do with field recordings. So this is a field recording of a clock. And let me just show you, it's made with a contact mic to record. And I really like that recording anyway. I used it in a piece before, but I like this little section because it's just these tones that are left over at the end of the clock chime. And I've actually sampled just this bit. And what I've done is I've just to kind of, for fun, I've shown you how you can change it so much. So this is it with a whole bunch of stuff going on. So I've got EQ on it. But I've also repitched it, and I've also, so you can see that I've detuned it there, but I've also brought out the parts of the recording that I like. So that is an example of how you can drastically change something from that to this. But not only that, I've then also used what a plugin called Simpler to put this into MIDI. So in Simpler, you have your sample, and I've actually, you can see this is the same sample that I've been using right here. And what I did was I actually just dragged this on to Simpler. And now I can, I can mess around with how much of that sample I'm using, but I'm using this much, and I can use my keyboard on my computer, or you could use a MIDI keyboard controller to now actually play with that sample that I've made. So, like so. then you'll be able to see that I've now got a MIDI part here that I have made, and then I can obviously mess around with that even more. So this is the messing around with it more. So now we're going to look at this plugin called Grain Delay, which I really like in Ableton, and you can really start to mess around with sounds in it. So here we are back in our session, and I've got the MIDI recording that I did for you before. And with the MIDI recording, with this MIDI track, I've added this grain delay. And so you're going to hear, if I just solo that, it's going to sound a bit different. So what I'm going to do as well is bring that back there so that I can show you how it works. So there's lots of different parameters here. I won't go into exactly what everything means, but safe to say you can really play around with the structure of sound and start to really craft it. What I've also done is I've brought in the original escalator sound, one of them that we were working with, just to show how we're going to go back to that original field recording, but now add in this very abstracted sound that's become much more musical. So I'm going to go ahead and just show you what this might look like. And then finally, I'm going to show you an example of mixing raw and distorted field recordings together. I think this is one of the best ways you can use this, use field recordings in music, if you're using them in their kind of raw state. So now I'm just going to show you what you can do if you have parts of a field recording that you want to maybe slightly distort, and this is a really simple example with reverb. So I've got my original recording here, and so you remember that. That's the clock, and so if I'm going to now show you what it sounds like. I've got this track where I've doubled it up, but I've taken out some of the audio from the track, so it's just got moments of the same field recording. But on this channel I've got a reverb, I've also got an EQ as well, but I'm using a reverb so that it will have this different quality to it. So let me show you what that sounds like. And you notice that I raised the volume there a little bit just to exaggerate it, but you don't have to do that, obviously. And it's just shows you how you can kind of fade in some distorted versions of the same field recording. Okay, so that's just a bunch of examples of manipulating field recordings in your DAW. So just to summarize, I know we've looked at a lot, and hopefully that sparked a lot of creative ideas for you. So field recordings are recordings that are captured outside of the studio. That's my working definition right now anyway. They're also a vehicle for creative concepts and experimentation. I think that a lot of the examples that I've shown today have demonstrated that, although the possibilities are endless, and it's really how far can your imagination go. What field recordings are is impacted by numerous factors, especially your creative intentions. I would say that it's really important to, I just think in production in general and composition in general, be mindful of your creative intentions, because then that influences the decisions you make. The decisions you make influence the output, and then the output influences how your listener experiences something. So those creative intentions are really important, and being mindful of those with field recording will help you eventually then get recordings that you really love. Used raw, field recordings can be used raw, and I've shown you some examples of that in those videos that I shared, or they can be infinitely manipulated. So, you can start off with a recording that is very, very, much grounded in a particular object or a place or a time, and it can become something totally different. And I think those last, the grain delay and the simpler examples, I think showed that the most from what I showed you today. And field recordings are capable of being used as musical instruments in their own right, as well as overall textures. So, and I often like to use a combination. I like to use some of my recordings that I've really left quite raw. Maybe I've EQ'd them a little bit. And then other ones where I've highly manipulated them to pick out certain features or elements in the raw recordings, or maybe just subvert those raw recordings in themselves. And as you've heard, I often use them with my music, but I've also got a whole bunch of compositions that I've made which are predominantly using field recording, soundscape composition, experimental studio composition. So there's the application of them is really exciting. So if you want to further explore this, then I've got some resources for you. So firstly, definitely go to the Girls Twiddling Knobs podcast, because there are a couple, I've picked out two in particular about field recording. Field recording is mentioned a few times in other episodes, but these two are really, really helpful. So go to femalediymusician.com/GTK podcast, or just search wherever you listen to your podcasts. And episode 25 is all about using field recordings in your music. And it's similar to what I looked at today, but I go through a lot more of the history of field recording, the female pioneers as well in this practice. And yeah, so it's a great, if you're interested in this, I really recommend going and listening to that as well. And then episode 26 with Nick Nack, playing with sound in conversation with Nick Nack. And Nick Nack made a fantastic album, which actually meant that she was nominated for an Oram Award, which was using field recordings that they took from Turkey, and then composed them, and I think in really interesting, almost kind of dystopian ways. So and Nick Nack's a DJ and does DJing with field recordings too. So if you're interested in that, I recommend those two episodes. If you're interested in finding out more about women in field recording, I recommend you go and check out Hildegard Vesterkamp. She composed the piece Kit's Beach Sandwalk, which is one of the kind of seminal soundscape composition field recording composition pieces out there. So go to hildegardvesterkamp.ca. Christina Kabuch as well. So another really great artist using field recordings, go to christinakabuch.de. Annie Lockwood, again, another kind of person that's made a big contribution to this field over the years is Annie Lockwood. So annielockwood.com. And then a slightly more kind of, I don't know, like all of these people you could say are contemporary, but someone who's a bit more current, maybe. They're all current, but Jana Winderin, and Jana Winderin makes recordings of underwater, of icebergs, very interesting stuff going on there. So janawinderin.com. So those are some resources for diving deeper into women in this field, I feel like it's an opportunity to highlight those figures because it's a We Move seminar for Music Hackspace. And if you want to develop your field recording practice with me, I'm planning a whole training around field recording for women, and I use the word women in its expansive term. And you can join the waitlist to find out more about that at femalediymusician.com/field recording waitlist. And I'll be emailing you with more information about the kind of form that might take. So thanks so much. I really hope that that's been useful, and that's it.
Yay, that was fabulous. Thank you so much. I've been manically collecting questions in the chat.
Yeah.
So I will share the ones that I've collected so far, and I'm sure that the chat will chime in more. In fact, they already are.
Okay.
I'm loving. This is possibly the chattiest chat we've ever had.
Oh, great.
On this stream, which is absolutely sick. Like I'm literally scooping them up so rapidly. It's hilarious. Okay, right. So
amazing.
So I'm just going to start asking, and then I'll scoop up more as we go along, and you can get into the process of actually answering them.
Sure.
So you mentioned gloves quite early in the stream, and someone asked, are there any soundless gloves?
Did I mention gloves?
I think
God,
so.
I can't even remember that.
Yeah. Or maybe it came up in the chat, but basically, do you have any recommendations for any handling equipment?
Oh, wow. Well, there's actually something. If you can get a shock mount for your Zoom recorder, that's the best thing to do. Otherwise, your Zoom recorder or whatever recorder you're using can pick up those hand movements.
Yes. Okay, great. So they're still slinging them in, which is brilliant. Okay, I wanted to know this actually. What's your favorite field recording you have ever made, and have you made use of it?
Okay. That's a really good question. I do really like the clock recording that I shared because I love the detail, because it's a contact microphone, which for anyone who doesn't know, it means it records the vibrations going through solid matter rather than the vibrations going through air, which is what most microphones are recording. So the contact mic is actually stuck to a grandfather clock, and it's picking up the vibrations going through the wood. And because of that, I feel like it's a much more detailed recording, and it almost feels like you're in the clock. But I love the details inside of it. I love how you can hear the gears click in, and you can kind of hear them almost cranking up, and then they click in, and then the chime. So I do really like that recording. I also really I made a series of recordings. I really wanted to do it like a joke installation called Gates I Have Known, because when you start walking and like field recording a lot, you do come across a lot of gates that make different noises. So I've got a few different recordings. There's actually one track on my most recent album Chalk Flint, which is called With You, and it's at least 50% of the music information on that is made from gate recordings. Some of them are the wind passing through the tubes of gates, and some of them are a particular gate right on top of a hill that when you move it, because it's rusty, it starts making all these kind of singing sounds, and I repitched them to go with the key of the song. And so and then I've made a lot of recordings underwater, and I love that because what I found anyway with my recordings underwater is that I have to do a lot of EQ to kind of extrapolate what's going on in them, because they can sound very kind of like whereas if you start, I've brought up a lot of the low frequencies in those recordings so that I can really hear the rumbles, and I can hear there's a different quality to them, and so I've really enjoyed doing those as well. And it has meant like wading through water waist deep to get some as well. That's I like the process as well of making them. So I like having, I'm the kind of person, I love walking anyway, so I like having to like scramble through hedgerows and wade through ditches, and it's all part of the, yeah, it is. I like doing that. So yeah.
Okay, amazing. Right. So next person has asked, with the EQ showing how the sound is coming in, and the goal being simply to make it sound the best or sound best, do you want balance? Hang on. Do you want to balance the more prominent frequencies with the less audible ones? For example, loud bass?
Depends what you're going for. You know, I mean, I know you're saying you want something natural, but then that really depends on, well, what is it that you're recording? Because if it's, say, the escalator, or maybe the role of that escalator in a particular track is to highlight that kind of bass rumble. But it could be that you would have heard when I was showing you where I've raised the high frequencies, that you like the kind of clacky clack clack feeling of those high frequencies too. So I think you've always got to tune in your ears. I always say this to my students as well. They probably hate me saying this. You've got to use your ears. It's really hard to give people, especially with field recording, like a one size fits all piece of advice. But what I would say is, if you're trying to EQ something naturally, listen to the recording and just start, take a band EQ and start just sweeping it around and see when you're lifting certain sections of the frequencies, do you like those particular parts of the recording? Are they hidden at the moment? Can you lift them out a bit more? And just start kind of lifting different sections and make some notes, keep a log so that you can record what you're thinking. It can sometimes really help with you organizing your ideas and then deciding what parts do you want to bring out, what parts do you maybe want to take away. A lot of the time people, for example, this is like a really common one, people will make a recording of birdsong, then they'll say, it's really annoying, I've made a recording of birdsong, but all I can hear is cars, or all I can hear is the wind blowing through trees. So try and kind of use that EQ to kind of sweep around and try and find where is the birdsong happening. And then we can take out the frequencies where that birdsong isn't happening. And then we're getting that nice birdsong that you're looking for example. So it's really hard to give a one size fits all, but it is about using EQ to kind of dial into what are the bits of the field recording you're trying to showcase.
Okay, great. So next question, with field recordings turned into MIDI sounds, I found the lower the note on the keyboard, the longer the sound takes. So it doesn't match the timing of the top notes. I think a lot of people have found that with things like Q sampler and things like that. How do you remedy that for chords?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that when I've used Ableton's simpler plugin, that hasn't been so much of a problem. I mean, when you heard me playing around with that in the example that I showed, there was quite a lot of consistency there with the length of the notes. So I would recommend, I think it will differ depending on what you're using, but I would recommend, if you're having an issue with that in a particular piece of software you're using, that definitely like search for how do I keep consistency in the length of notes. It's, in all honesty, it's not a problem that I've had using Ableton simpler.
Okay, so that's kind of your recommendation, really, isn't it? Is try it through a different sampler and see if you have the same issues.
Yeah,
as well as like doing a good Google sweep of.
I would, yeah, because every as everyone knows, I'm sure watching this, every plugin will have its own kind of idiosyncrasies, and it could be that there's literally one thing that you press and it keeps those lengths of the notes, it stretches the notes so that it's consistent. So I would do that first before you start kind of chopping and changing between plugins.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. So jurisdiction, like jurisdictional question, I don't know the word, I'm sorry. Is it okay to use others' voices without permission?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Last time I checked, which was a while ago now, I have to admit, but last time I checked, yes, it's okay. It's different to using someone's image. Now that may have changed, but if you happen to be out recording and you happen to pick up a sentence somebody says, as far as I know, that's okay. You can't be sued. No one can come after you. Whereas if you use somebody's image, that's a different matter. Do check that though, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, there are different rules for certain spaces as well. Like if you're and whether you're kind of recording sound with a visual, like I know that the rules are different in the City of London to like other places, but also but as well, I mean, you use photography as an example. It's usually good courtesy to ask to take photographs of people, but the image belongs to the photographer, you don't necessarily need permission. It's kind of weird. So
yeah,
so it's I think that's a good piece of advice to just do a bit of research and check it out.
I think so. I think if it's that you're, I think it will always come back to intention as well. If it's just that you're out and you happen to pick up a couple of words that somebody says, don't worry about it. Like that is fine. You're not gonna, no one's gonna come after you. Likelihood is no one's gonna hear that anyway. If you go out intending to record people's voices and you don't ask for permission, then that's different. You know, if you're like actually, like if you're specifically trying to go out and get people's voices, I would say then it's courtesy to say, I'm doing a recording, I'd love to record your voice. Like but also there's the thing of context. Like if you're just wanting to get the sound of a cacophony of a cafe where you can't pick out any individual voice, again, don't worry about it. Like it's about can you pick out that person's voice, and have you intentionally gone out to record their voice, or has it have just a couple of words popped up in the background that you can't really even work out very well? So all those things are important to consider as well, but definitely go and do your own research on that.
Cool. Okay, next person asks, what about noise reduction? What are your thoughts on applying noise reduction?
I think there's no right and wrong there. If it helps you get to where you need to go, then by all means use noise reduction. I think that I always prefer to use EQ, because it means that I can be more intentional, that word again, intentional about what I'm doing and what I'm taking out. I also try and, depending on the project, make sure that I'm making decisions about the time of day, the position I'm using my mic, all that stuff, so that I have as little noise to reduce as possible. But I would personally, I prefer using EQ because I can be more specific about it.
Okay, interesting. So next person is asking, I'd like to know more about underwater microphones. Are there any inexpensive underwater microphones available?
Yeah, there are. So I actually bought my first hydrophone from, I think, what is it called? The RNIB, I think.
Isn't that the people who deal with blind people?
Isn't it for birds?
Okay.
Maybe I've got that wrong. Maybe, yeah. So it's some acronym with B in it. And they happen to do a series of they sell microphones for people who are nature enthusiasts.
Oh, so, do you mean the RSPB? That's the birds people.
Yeah, maybe it is the RSPB, but I feel like it was a slightly different one. Okay. But anyway, okay, I need to find that out. But yeah, and I think it's just because I searched like underwater microphone or hydrophone or something, and it came up. But then also there's someone called Jez Riley French, who is an artist / field recordist, and he makes hydrophones and sells them from his site. He also makes contact mics and sells them from his site. So I've since bought a stereo hydrophone from him as well.
Okay, Jez, what was the name?
Jez Riley French.
Jez Riley French. We've got people speculating on the acronyms now. Okay, Jez. Yeah. I'm Riley French. Spelling ? For underwater mics. Please Google. There we go. I'm just dropping that in the chat while I remember. Cool. Okay, great. So next question. After putting the sample into Simpler, do I need to set up anything more to turn it into an instrument?
No, apart from that, just make sure that your MIDI controller, if you're using MIDI controller, is connected and is talking to your computer. And then you can manipulate all the different parameters in Simpler to, change the way that the sample's behaving as well.
Yes. Okay. Next question. We're tearing through these. I'm very impressed with our efficiency. Okay. Any tips on how to position microphones? This particular person has a Zoom H4n and doesn't really quite know where to point it.
Okay. Yeah. So if you're trying to just capture the ambience of somewhere, then I would recommend that you're basically just standing somewhere without any obstructions in front of you, and that you're standing at enough of a distance that you're capturing the environment, you know. So basically, let's say you are trying to capture a forest, that you have it, you know, at your kind of chest height, for example, and that you've got it pointing in the direction that you're hearing what you want to record, and that you're not kind of pointing it really closely at something, that you've got it far away enough that you're just going to capture that whole ambience. The Zoom with the inbuilt microphones, it's a stereo setup anyway, so it's going to be hopefully capturing that ambience, you know, relatively wide for you. But then if you're trying to record something very specific, then you'll want to have a different approach, which is going to be more about being able to actually direct it at the thing that you're trying to record. So let's say you want to record a stream. It's really interesting if you hold your microphone at different points on the stream. And this is, again, you have to tune your ears in. So it could be that as the stream's trickling over a rock, you're getting a lot more detail in how that water's moving. Whereas if you've got the recorder where there's a kind of more of a waterfall part, it's much more like a kind of dense white noise sound. So just doing some exploration of, if you're trying to record a specific thing, moving around, moving the mic closer, further away, that's where you can get, you know, more into the nooks and crannies of a particular thing that you're trying to record.
Okay, great. Brilliant. So lots of people asking about microphone recommendations. I'm assuming this is outside of the underwater microphone realm, which you've already given. Do you have a fave?
I mean, not really, to be honest. Like I'm not, like I've said before, I'm not someone that's particularly bothered about, you know, doing a big inventory of different makes and models of microphones. Not me. Okay. So I actually think the inbuilt mics on the Zoom are good for doing a stereo recording of an environment. Sennheiser do some good shotgun microphones where you can get a really good directional recording. And then I really like using recordings like contact mics, binaural mics. Rode do a pair of very affordable binaural mics. I like using the hydrophone microphones that I told you about to get some more of those kind of slightly different recordings, so different ways of recording things outside of the studio. Okay,
brilliant. We have a question about recommendations for handheld shock mounts.
Yeah. Hang on a minute. I'm just going to quickly look that up because I won't remember. So Rycote, that's it. Rycote do a little bundle, which is a handheld shock mount, and I'm just gonna put a link here for you, Jenny, if you want to share this in the chat.
Yeah.
So that is about 100 quid. That's, you know, that's a kind of more like, if you're getting serious about it and you really want to make sure that you're covering all bases, that includes a windshield, which looks like the little, you know, the little troll dolls. It looks like their hair, basically. So
excellent description, well done.
Yeah, so it includes a very comfy and grippable handle, the kind of shock mount bit that means that you're not going to hear the movement on the recorder, and then it also includes the windshield. That's 100 quid. But if you're kind of seriously like making a lot of recordings like I have done over the years, it really makes a difference. You can get, so Zoom do their own version of this, but because it doesn't have that kind of shock mount bit where there's like it's almost like a spring, you can still get a bit of those hand sounds as you're holding it.
Okay, amazing. I'm just gonna put that in shock mount.
And it's just called the Rye Zoom. I mean, it's saying Zoom H5, but I'm sure it works with all the Zooms. Rycote Zoom 8 audio kit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing. Such good recs. There we go. Okay. Sick. So I think I'm just going to throw this out to the stream. I've only got one question left. So this is like your window. Come on, gang. If there's a question that I've missed, drop it in the chat. Do it. Do it by the end of the answer to this question so that I have more questions to ask. Okay, so next question. If mixing to, for example, remove wind, I assume the outdoor rather than the indoor kind, then does this limit the possibilities for mastering later? In brackets, I heard that for mastering they like you not to have used Gates EQ. I don't think that's true.
No, I haven't heard that myself, and I think as the recording as well is probably going to be amongst many other elements.
Yeah.
Even if you used a high pass EQ band on that recording, because that's what you'd be using if you're taking out those lower frequencies. That's where the wind's going to be.
Yeah.
So it's going to be mixed in with lots of other things anyway. I can't see why that would cause a problem.
Yeah, me neither. I mean, to be honest, like I found out more about mastering in the past few years because of Katie Davini, who's a wonderful mastering engineer that I work with often. And Katie's like one of the best engineers in the country and for mastering, and has very much said like there's very little that a mastering engineer shouldn't really be able to deal with. Like and it's dependent on the individual as well. And they're like if you're shooting for to work with a particular mastering engineer and they have a style to what they do that you want on what you're making, then it will become apparent quite quickly through your discussions and dialogue with them what they do and don't like in a recording by the time it gets to them. For example, I experimented for a while on something I was working on that Katie was going to collaborate on with using using compression on the side chaining the lead vocal to compress other instruments to create space for the lead vocal, which Katie did not agree with, and she let me know very quickly. And so we found other ways to achieve what I was trying to achieve by using different techniques. So I think it is very much down to the individual mastering engineer.
Yeah, and I think that if you've taken out all of the low frequencies and then you bounce that out and there's no low frequencies in your mix, and then you say to the mastering engineer, I want to just have like a really nice rich low, boost the lows, and then the mastering engineer says, well, you've taken them all out. So there's that too, but that's so unlikely that that's what's going to be happening. You're probably going to be using a field recording. I'm imagining people who've come to this workshop, because it's all about using it in music production, you're probably using it as a texture behind other musical elements. So I don't think that's going to be a problem, no. And I think that I've taken out wind multiple times, because even with a windshield sometimes you get wind interference. That's just the reality of making field recordings.
Yeah, it's just being outside.
Yeah
Absolutely.
Little tip for anyone who, just added like a bonus tip for anyone who wants to record wind, record it from a window, or from around the corner of a house, because often people will be like, I really want to get the sound of wind, but obviously when you are recording outside and you've got your recorder in the elements, then you just get all this wind interference. So if anyone wants to capture the actual sound of wind, like howling or blowing, do it from a window, do it from around the corner of a house.
That was a good tip. Actually, I think that's probably the place to end. Right, so they're all out of questions. There's no more questions coming in, so I think that's probably the best place to close. So thank you so much. That was terrific. Really, really interesting. And I'm sure we've had lots of people sending in their thanks as well and saying, yeah, this is brilliant, really learning a lot of things. We've had a lot of people swapping techniques in the chat as well, which is quite lovely. Yeah, so that's delightful. Just so everybody knows, I'm going to drop in the Discord link for the Music Hackspace Discord. So if you think of a question after this session and you're like, I wished I'd have asked this, and you aren't connected with one of Isobel's awesome projects, then you can hop over to our Discord and slip it into the We Move channel, and we will get that question to her. So, you know, that will mean that you'll still get to ask your question even when the stream is over. You know, this is the miracle of technology. So that's great. So the Discord link is now in the chat. And just in case anyone is stumbling into the We Move sessions for the first time, welcome. So We Move is a session of 25 seminars and workshops that are helmed by experts in technology and music who just happen to be women and gender minority. And today has been our fabulous Dr. Isobel Anderson talking about field recordings. We do keep an eye on our socials, which is Music Hackspace. It's our handle for everything. And on our website, on our What's On listings for more. We do have a We Move page as well, but What's On also includes all our other courses and resources that are available, because we're a tech education platform. That is what we do. So yeah, go and check it out. We're at musichackspace.org. And Isobel, where do people find you for your things?
So just go to, and what I'll do is I'll drop this in the chat so you can share it in the chat there, Jenny. So femalediymusician.com, and that should be there.
Okay,
and
lovely.
If anyone wants to join the waitlist for the field, like I'm going to be designing a whole course on field recording, I'll just drop that in for you as well. It's just femalediymusician.com/field recording waitlist.
Yay. Okay, I'm just gonna
but just to be clear, that is for women. So yeah, it's targeted at women.
Cool. So there will be other opportunities, I'm sure, for thems that are gentlemen in various capacities to enjoy your fabulous teaching. But the stuff that you do is concentrated on boosting the skills and the confidence level and the expertise of women and gender minorities, because we're still highly underrepresented, which is why this series exists, and why you do what you do and why I do what I do. So, you know, it's totally understandable. But yeah, okay, amazing. Right, so lovely stream. We've had so much fun. So yeah, everyone have a fantastic evening. Do check out all the stuff that's in the chat, and we hope that you've had a fab evening too. So that's it. And Isobel, you and I can stay on the Zoom for a minute, but I will allow the stream to disappear.
Okay.
I've just got to unhook us from the live, so bear with me a moment.
Brilliant.
Okay,
thanks
lovely.
everyone for showing up.
Thank you so much. You're all amazing. I'm literally waiting to see by my hand gestures which things I'm saying. It's really funny. And there we go.